10 red flags of language learners, or in other words, 10 bad habits that will prevent or slow fluency. Let's get into it. Number 1, getting mad if someone corrects you. Whether it's your grammar or your accent or something else, you can't take it personally if someone corrects you. Now, this one is a rite of passage for many language learners. Myself included, I had to overcome this once upon a time as well. We tend to make our learning abilities part of who we are, and because of that, we tend to take it personally if someone will correct us. It will affect our self-esteem. It's almost like they are, instead of attacking what we're doing wrong grammatically, they are attacking us and saying that we are not good at what we're doing and we are failing at life. That's a bit hyperbolic, but that's how we tend to take it. And this is something that we have to overcome as language learners, or we will never reach fluency. Je veux pas me corriger. Je veux avoir raison toujours. Bon, maintenant personne ne veut me parler. Je n'apprends rien. Number 2, not dealing with trauma in your mother tongue. I wish more people realize this. If you have unresolved trauma, practicing another language can intensify it. Hey? Let me explain. The process of learning another language won't activate dormant trauma, but practicing it will. Insecure? Some languages have a blunter culture than others. Speaking with native speakers is going to be rough for you and you're going to feel lousy and inferior afterwards. Daddy or mommy issues? Family dynamics vary across cultures, and the foreign toxic boyfriend or girlfriend is way more alluring than the domestic one. Codependent? Learning a new language allows you to practice vocabulary nicely, and if you think you overshare in your mother tongue, wait till you see how much you overshare in a language you're excited to practice speaking. I could go on, but you get the point. ¡Ole! Hablo fluidas en 2 idiomas. Estoy lastimado en 2 idiomas también. Number 3, you put too much importance on traveling. As the old saying goes, a drowning man can't learn how to swim. If you were in a foreign country and you didn't have any way to communicate, you'd probably panic a little. And you can't learn Japanese in Japan, for example, when you're freaking out. すみません。英語が話せますか? いえ、大丈夫です。字幕が必要です。And gaining fluency abroad is not guaranteed. If traveling were all it took to learn another language, there wouldn't be so many monolingual British and American tourists, just to name a couple examples. On the contrary, traveling is not necessary to gain fluency. Traveling can help if you are not overwhelmed by the immersion, but for that to work, you have to be receptive, not panicking, and not speaking your mother tongue, like, at all. Number 4, acting like you are more fluent than you actually are. Hey, wie geht's? Hast du die neue Episode von Babylon Berlin geguckt? Hey! Nein, ich habe gestern nichts gekocht. Eh? Yeah, no. I see this a lot. It's actually the main reason why I no longer join language learning groups or language learning chats in general anymore. It gets old really quick. I understand that it's not always intentional, and for many it's a rite of passage, but you have to be honest with yourself where you are in terms of fluency. You'll never progress if you don't. Number 5, your pronunciation is terrible. Привет! Как дела, мой друг? Ты знаешь, что я могу говорить по-английски, да? Извини, но я не хочу говорить по-русски с тобой. It doesn't matter how polite or supportive you want to be. If you can't understand a person you're talking to, one or both of you is going to walk away frustrated from the conversation. If you can even call that a conversation. The same thing happens if you are the one speaking with a thick, unintelligible accent. The roles are reversed, but the dynamic doesn't change. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't need to speak with a perfect accent to be understood, but you need to at least be comprehensible before you start talking with native speakers. Number 6, you're a perfectionist. Não querer falar até que pode falar perfeitamente, por isso nunca falei nem um pouco. Get rid of perfectionism. Yay! You want to speak with perfect grammar right away? You want to sound like a native speaker immediately? You want to make no mistakes at all? Well, that's too bad. Perfectionism is a problem in general, and learning a language is far from forgiving if you're a perfectionist. Number 7, you only learn with textbooks. Good morrow, gentlemen. Should we head to a proximal inn or tavern to eat, drink, and be merry? For the last time, Kyle. It's, sup guys, wanna go to a club? Wanna go to a bar? You don't have to be so specific either. Wanna grab some food, get some drinks, blow off some steam? Stop talking like my great-great-granddad or something. It's really weirding me out. You may be thinking that's an extreme example and it seems fake, but you'd be surprised. Textbook language is often stuffy, formal, and outdated. Language constantly changes, and even if the textbook is current when it's published, there's a good chance that some of it is already outdated by the time you read it. You should always learn culture, slang, and modernisms with a grain of salt. Movies, TV shows, TikTok videos, YouTube videos, etc. are usually more reliable for learning these things than textbooks are. But make sure what you're watching is actually authentic and the person knows what they're talking about. Number 8, you refuse to study at all. I've heard so many excuses for this one. I don't have the attention span to study. Studying is boring. I don't want to, etc., etc. Like, none of these are going to be helpful to you as a learner. In some ways, this is the same problem as only learning from a textbook, and in other ways, it's the other side of the coin. Mundane life is often boring. Mundane life doesn't win awards. Mundane life doesn't keep the audience engaged. Most of the time, the vocabulary that you see in movies and TV shows is dramatic, hyperbolic. More often than not, it is an exaggeration. It is a parody of a certain type of character. It is comedic. It can be intentionally archaic. If you are not a native speaker, you won't be able to notice when they're purposely being rude, breaking social norms for the sake of comedy, intentionally speaking like they're from a period drama, or just talking in a way that's completely archaic for sake of comedy. More often than not, when I've talked to people who only learn through shows and movies, their grammar is terrible. And if they learned grammatical patterns so it doesn't come across as terrible, it's only a matter of time before they become inconsistent and their grammar gets worse as the conversation goes on. If you didn't have to study at all, grammar wouldn't be focused on in language classes, even for native speakers of those languages. Grammar is by no means the most important part of language, but it's still an important part. But why do I need to study? There are subtitles on what I'm watching. Subtitles are not word for word, and more often than not, they're also not in the order you hear spoken. This is where the importance of understanding grammar, things that you learn from textbooks, comes into play. A good example of this is people will watch anime and they'll be like, oh, I'm picking up words here and there. And then they're actually learning the wrong meanings for those words. Words that are repeated constantly, even out of long sentences, you'll pick up. Like everyone knows baka, everyone knows shine, stuff like that. All these dramatic words that you really don't hear a whole lot in everyday conversation unless you're joking around with close friends. Even in English, how often do you say stupid? It's not your main word that you use. You'll use it, but it's not enough to get by. How often do you tell people to go die? That's what shine means. Die! It's actually a little bit more profane than that because grammar, but we're not getting into that. I digress. Like, these aren't things you typically use in English. They're dramatic. You'll use them when you're joking around or if you're purposely acting dramatic. Japanese syntax, the way that a sentence is formed, is more often than not the mirror opposite of English. Because of this, when you see subtitles in English on the bottom of something you're watching, be it anime or something else that is in Japanese, what you are seeing on the subtitles is actually what is being said before or after. So they are not in sync. There's no way to make them be in sync. If you're just trying to learn from watching and reading the subtitles, you're not going to learn anything, and if you do learn something, you're not going to learn anything that's correct. Here's some examples of this weird syntax that I'm mentioning. German. If you German, to speak want, must you like this talk? Japanese. Japanese speaking wanted is if. In this way, speaking required is. You see why subtitles can't be relied upon to teach you vocabulary? If you understand the grammar, you can learn from subtitles this way. Maybe. Be smart if you're learning from subtitles. Number 9, you choose to be illiterate. Ma questa lingua è difficile. Non devo poter leggerla. Voglio solamente poter parlarla. No. I see this happen with languages like Japanese and Chinese most frequently because of how intimidating the writing systems of those languages can be, but I see it happen with others as well if these languages don't use the Latin alphabet. Willful illiteracy is a bad idea, and it can even be dangerous. In most cases, illiteracy is not willful, and it's usually a product of extreme conditions, which prevent access to reading and learning materials. Some examples include extreme poverty and oppression. Willful and non-willful illiteracy can encourage others to take advantage of this ignorance. The illiterate are often more likely to be taken advantage of, to be victims of scams, and to be exploited for their labor, or worse. With these extreme issues set aside, however, there are still issues with only being able to speak a language. Some of these issues include not being able to access learning materials since you can't read the language that the materials are written in, not being able to communicate online since the majority of time, text messages, emails, posts, comments all involve written language, not spoken. And more often than not, written communication is preferred over spoken communication, unless you're face-to-face or actually on a call with someone. And you can quite possibly feel lost in a foreign location, foreign country, etc. if you cannot read the signage. English is not always provided, contrary to popular belief, and even when it is, it's not always accurate. There are several compilations you can see of poorly translated signage throughout the world. And number 10, policing the language. Kanatelathos. I grammatikisas δεν είναι καλοί. Είσαστε Έλληνας? Συγγνώμη. You need to know the rules in order to break them. But native speakers, regardless of the language, use slang, abbreviations, and use ungrammatical sentence constructions on a regular basis. Strictly adhering to grammar is great if you're writing a book, probably, and if you're speaking formally, usually. But in everyday conversation, speakers don't really care about grammar rules. Learning which rules native speakers follow and which ones they tend to break will make you come across as more fluent and more like a native speaker. And never ever correct a native speaker's grammar when you are not qualified to do so. And even if you are, don't do it just out of the blue if they didn't ask you to. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Like this video if you found value in it. Subscribe for more language content. And I'll see you next time when I discuss some common mistakes that language learners make that are not as severe as the ones I've listed in this video. Until then, friends, happy language learning.